So, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful that you were able to make it for this weekend. I know that some of you here have planned this trip here for months, and some of you it just became a possibility in the last few days. There's some people who planned to come this weekend and problems arose in their life and they couldn't come. So, it's actually quite challenging to get to a place to do virtuous things like we're doing this weekend. So, you can rejoice that you got here. And also that we didn't die in the night. And that sounds maybe ridiculous to say, but thousands of people died last night. They certainly didn't plan to, and it happens. So we're here, we're healthy, and we're here because we all care about this topic of developing compassion in challenging times. So I'm here sharing as a Dharma friend. I'm not a teacher, and I have not realized the things that I'm going to share with you today. I have the aspiration to, but I have confidence in what our teachers are teaching us on, developing compassion. And I'm convinced that we can all do it. And it's going to take a great deal of effort and commitment. But I'm also convinced that our teachers wouldn't be telling us these things, giving us these teachings, if they didn't think it was possible for every single living being. Why bother, as Venerable Chuni said last night? We could go and walk for the rest of the day. And in fact, last night, with the beautiful teaching that we received, if we realized everything that Venerable Chuni spoke about last night, we could, go for a picnic right now. But, that's not how it is for our mind. We have to really spend time listening to teachings, reading about them over and over and over again, reflecting on them, bringing to mind what makes sense to us from our own experience, sitting on the cushion. And we do that again and again and again. And slowly, 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 we get to, this destination of cultivating compassion and eventually becoming fully awakened. So we're going to introduce you to a number of books that you can add to your library. We'll send you a reading list when you get home. And you can't go wrong with the books we're going to recommend, that's for sure. So I thought I'd start this morning by leading a meditation as the motivation, and it's written by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who was one of Venerable Chodron's first teachers. And it's going to make you feel so happy about the fact you made it here, and it's going to give you a sense of, it's going to bolster our self-confidence, which I think we all need. And even His Holiness says, we have to have a healthy sense of self-confidence to practice the path. And this is not meant to puff up our ego, but it's meant to give us some fuel to continue, doing the practices that we need to do. So before I start, if you know that you should be in a chair, it's not a failure. Being in pain for the rest of the morning is not cool. It's not conducive. So if you need to shift actually at any point to a chair, please, there's lots at the back, just grab one. It's not going to disturb anyone's samadhi, trust me. And we can just be happy that you're not in pain. Okay, so let's get into our meditation posture. Right hand in your left, thumbs touching, they can just rest on your lap. You can lower your head a little bit. Don't close your eyes because that will lead to sleeping. And just do a quick body scan. If there's areas in your body that are a little bit tense, just bring your attention there and bring some warmth and light to that area. And most importantly, have an upright spine that isn't tense, but just upright and relaxed. And before I lead this motivation, we're going to spend just a few minutes settling our mind and body and just bring your attention to the breath. So what is the importance of doing retreat? Why do people need to do retreat? It's not simply to be quiet, to have a break from one's family. Instead, there are very crucial reasons for doing retreat. Very urgent reasons. One reason is happiness. Happiness, peace, success depend upon the compassion and kindness of the other person. Depends on teachers, depends on students, depends on everyone. Happiness depends on one another. On a larger scale, the relationship between the leader of a country and its population also depends upon their cultivation of a proper attitude, a good heart, compassion. If one person is to avoid bringing problems, such as violence to a country, or even to the whole world, that too depends upon his or her development of compassion, loving kindness, and a good heart. At this time, the peace and happiness of millions of people, of the whole world, can depend upon one person who has power. And he or she may have no loving kindness or compassion whatsoever. Yet even a stranger in the street may show affection, a warm heart, loving kindness, and respect for another stranger. Just doing that gives him or her so much happiness. With such loving, compassionate thoughts, combined with one's own kind and respectful actions, it is truly possible to bring happiness and peace to many people every day, and even to animals. But even if the message were already widespread, that compassion and tolerance are greatly needed now for both individuals and the peace of the world, this alone would not be sufficient. We have to know how to develop such qualities. The solution is found by entering into retreat, entering into a situation where it's possible to fulfill our basic human potential and develop all the positive qualities within ourselves. Retreat gives us the time and space to allow for the growth of this basic human quality. This is crucial. It's most urgent. A true emergency. Why? Because others' lives are in danger, and so is our own. In retreat, we are free to think and have some quiet, peaceful time for ourselves without distractions. In a retreat situation, we have the opportunity to come face to face with ourselves, to see ourselves in depth, to meet ourselves. All development of our heart and mind comes from doing retreat. We become better human beings, better Dharma practitioners, better meditators. So retreat is the foundation of true development. Without retreat, without being alone, the mind is like muddy water. But the mind in retreat, being alone and free from outside distractions, can eventually be like a calm, crystal clear lake. Retreat is important because it involves retreating from ignorance, retreating from the dissatisfied mind of attachment, and retreating from our self-centered attitude. Transforming our mind into a positive state, freeing ourselves from unsatisfactory experiences and their causes. These are the essential purpose of Dharma practice. There will always be problems and dissatisfaction as long as we think that the causes of our happiness and the causes of our suffering lie outside of ourselves. But the experience of our life and the teachings of the Buddha tell us that the source of happiness is within our own mind. We can find satisfaction, peace, and happiness only within our own minds. Therefore, retreat and meditation practice become the ultimate solution for any and all of our problems. So are you rejoicing that you're on retreat? As I was preparing for this weekend, there is actually so much material available on the cultivation of compassion. It's impressive. There's a lot to choose from. And I think if you go away with just a few things this weekend and then you start working on some of the meditations we'll introduce you to, continuing the reading and reflecting and meditating on material that we'll send you that are good resources, I think you'll find that your mind has to change if we put in the work. If we come to this retreat, though, and we get really extremely inspired, and we go out of here on Sunday afternoon sailing down the road in our car, and just we've got the window down and we're saying mantras out the window, great. And I'm remembering what someone said at a conference that Venerable Chuni and I attended in December, and it was the Anti-Hate Conference in Spokane. I'll be talking about that either sometime later today or tomorrow. But almost the very last speaker that night was a fellow who raised his hand. He said, "You know what? This has been a magnificent experience for me. I'm so glad that 300 plus people showed up. This conference was organized very quickly. And then we heard that it was filled, and we phoned someone because we wanted to go. Venerable Sultan was there too, right? And we just decided to go, and we got in." So his point was, so you've come tonight, you've learned all of these things, you've gotten a lot of new knowledge about how to work against, hatred. But then he said, over and over and over again in my life, I've seen people get really fired up about things. They go to a conference, they talk to their friends, they get home, and they slip back into life. And it's a memory, and nothing changes. And I thought his point was fantastic. We get fired up, we get energized, we get inspired, and it's so hard to change those wheels of habit. And we get sucked back into our life. And we all know why. But, at a certain point, we have to make the determination that no matter what, I've got to start making changes. And it's not me praying that you will change, or you, or you. I've got to be the one that changes. And I'm the only one that can decide that. So I was very grateful that man spoke up that night and really reminded us that this is really, we're in a challenging time. Things have to change, but the change has to start here. So as I was thinking about, why now are our spiritual teachers really cranking up the heat and talking about the fact that we have to really start addressing these problems in the world? Right in this present moment, we're not in World War III. And just looking at some, history facts, as you are well aware, in the First World War, that later got the name the War to End All Wars, it lasted 4 years. 16 million people died in a 4-year span. The casualties were around 37 million. And at that point, I think people in the world thought, okay, that's it. We're done. That was brutal, The way those young boys died was brutal. So then, a few years later, as you all know, World War II happens. So the statistics on the deaths there are between 50 and 80 million people. Usually the books say 60. But the 80 million high-end number comes from all the war-related diseases and famine that occurred during and after the war. So then again, we learned the phrase as kids, lest we forget. Well, it's apparent that we can't hang on to these memories. And the reason is that we still have afflicted minds. We're under the influence of karma that we've created in past lives and in this life. And yes, we can learn from these things, but boy, it's going to have to take some effort. So as I'm reflecting on, these past atrocities and these spiritual teachers we have right now, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and in a minute I'm going to share from other teachers, they're cranking up the heat. Because they're saying, it's really dangerous. The meditation that I just read from Lama Zopa Rinpoche was written in 1992. And he's saying it's urgent. We're in danger. 9/11 hadn't happened yet. So our teachers are really trying to get our attention by emphasizing that, personal transformation has to really kick into gear here, and it has to kick into gear now. So they're trying to get our attention. So I stumbled upon the first chapter in this book written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And Venerable Children teaches on this book each Memorial Day weekend. And the teachings are also posted online if you can't make it. And in his opening chapter on this, he's talking about this very thing. And this book was published in 2006, so he probably was writing it between 2004, 2005. And he has identified some points that I think are very interesting that sort of make this topic that we're putting our minds on this weekend very vast. So I'd like to share some things from that first chapter from this book. And he says this: when we rise in the morning and listen to the news or read the newspaper, we're confronted with the same sad news: violence, wars, disasters. It is clear that even in modern times, precious life is not safe. I can't recall a single daily news program without a report of crime somewhere. There's so much bad news nowadays, such an awareness of fear and tension, that any sensitive and compassionate being, that's all of us, must question seriously the progress we've made in our modern world. Then he goes on to sort out why this is happening. It's fascinating. He says, ironically, the most serious problems emanate from industrially advanced societies where unprecedented literacy only seems to have fostered restlessness and discontent. You would think that literacy would really nurture, the human qualities. Of course it does. But he's pointing out that this is not the solution. There's no doubt about our collective progress in many areas, especially science and technology. But somehow, he says, our advances in knowledge are not sufficient. Basic human problems remain. We've not succeeded in bringing about peace. We've not reduced overall suffering. We know that to be true. I remember, and this will expose my age, oh well, my family used to come down to Coeur d'Alene when we were kids, and we'd camp at the Robin Hood campground in Coeur d'Alene. It's now a parking lot. And I will never forget the night that we watched. This campground was our favorite because there was a television outside. So all the kids were gathered around this television, and the adults, and we're watching the first guy, this first American, walk on the moon. Was that 67? 69? So we've done incredible things. What good did that do? I'm sorry, I didn't get it then. I don't get it now. I don't get it. So he says science and technology have contributed immensely to our overall development of humankind, to our material comfort, to well-being to a certain degree, as well as our understanding of the world we live in. But he says, if we put too much emphasis on these endeavors, we are in danger of losing those aspects of human knowledge that contribute toward the development of an honest and altruistic personality. Science and technology, he says, can't replace the age-old spiritual values that have been largely responsible for the true progress of world civilization as we know it today. And then he says we have to somehow find and strike a balance between material development on one side and development of spiritual values on the other. In order to bring about a great change, we need to revive and strengthen our inner values. And then His Holiness says this: I hope you share my concern about the present world moral crisis, and that you will join me in calling on all humanitarians and religious practitioners who share this concern to contribute to making our societies more compassionate, more just, and equitable. I say this not as a Buddhist, he says, not as a Tibetan, but simply as a human being. I don't speak, he says, as an expert on international politics, although I unavoidably comment on these matters, but as a part of the Buddhist tradition, which, like the traditions of the other great world religions, is founded on the bedrock of concern for all beings. And from this perspective, he says, I share with you the following beliefs. So I wrote up these beliefs that he articulates, and they can really frame the whole thing that we're going to think about and address this weekend. And the more I look at these 4 points that His Holiness says he believes are critical to keeping in mind daily, the more I see each one is so vast. And each point is so inspiring. Number 1, universal concern is essential to solving world problems. Number 2, love and compassion are the pillars of world peace. I think we should all put that right here across our computer that we look at all day long. Just right there. It'll fit. Love and compassion are the pillars of world peace. Number 3, all world religions seek to advance world peace, as do all humanitarians of whatever ideology. I think that one gets lost sometimes. And the 4th one, each individual has a responsibility to shape institutions to serve the needs of the world. So these are very vast topics. And we can fly with these, each of us, in our own way. Because each of us has our own unique experiences in life and our knowledge that we can take these and move forward. So I think as we go through the weekend, what you'll hear will be shaped by those 4 points. And then on your own, I'm going to invite you to unpack those for the rest of your life. That's your homework assignment. So later, a few days ago, I got an email from Stephen. And he sent me a link to a talk that was just given by Pope Francis. Pope Francis did a TED Talk. He did. And being a former Catholic, I was really interested, and I've just heard nothing but good press about Pope Francis. And the talk addresses the future you. And as Stephen said in the email, there's so many points that line up with Buddhist worldview. So I'm not going to share the whole talk. You can find, I'll send you the link. So we'll send you books to read. I'll send you the link. I'll send you the 4 points. So when you get home, you've got your project ahead. This talk is beautiful. I wish I understood Italian. Does anyone here speak Italian? Okay. Well, I'm going to share with you what he says. And it is just absolutely beautiful. So he says, the future you. So I should back up a bit. I guess every year there's a TED conference. And the conference is in a certain city. This year it was in Vancouver, BC. And most of the speakers come and they're live. But Pope Francis didn't go to Vancouver, BC, but they live streamed him. So he was a surprise element in this conference. So everyone was blown away by the fact that here he is on the big screen. So he says this: the future is made of views. It is made of encounters because life flows through our relations with others. Now we could spend the rest of this weekend thinking about that one sentence. Life flows through our relations with others. Quite a few years of my life have strengthened my conviction that each and everyone's existence is deeply tied to that of others. Life is not time merely passing by. Life is about interactions. Think about it. Life is about interactions. If we have the privilege of being aware that we've got 2 hours left to live in this life, what are you going to be reflecting on? You're probably going to be reflecting on how you interacted with others, for one, right? And then hopefully we're going to do our practice. But even in doing our practice, with the aspiration to become fully awakened, we're doing this practice for others. As I meet or lend an ear to those who are sick, to the migrants who face terrible hardships in search of a brighter future, to prison inmates who carry a hell of pain inside their hearts, and to those, many of them young, who can't find a job, I often find myself wondering, why them and not me. I myself, Pope Francis says, was born in a family of migrants. My father, my grandparents, like many other Italians, left for Argentina and met the fate of those who are left with nothing. I could have very well ended up among today's discarded people, and that's why I ask myself deep in my heart, why them and not me? First and foremost, I would love it if this meeting, the TED Talk meeting, could help to remind us that we all need each other. None of us is an island, an autonomous and independent I, separated from the other. And we can only build the future by standing together, including everyone. No one's left out. We don't think about it often, but everything is connected, and we need to restore our connections to a healthy state. Even the harsh judgment I hold in my heart against my brother or my sister, the open wound that was never cured, the offense that was never forgiven, the rancor that's only going to hurt me, are instances of a fight that I carry within me, a flare deep in my heart that needs to be extinguished before it goes up in flames, leaving only ashes behind. This next paragraph, I tried to find him saying this in Italian. That's why I asked if anyone here speaks Italian. Because I think to hear these words in Italian, even if we didn't get it, we'd get it. Because Italian is so musical and it's a heart language. So he says this: the third message I would like to share today indeed is about revolution, the revolution of tenderness. And what is this tenderness? It's the love that comes, oh, this is going to make me cry. Oh, great. Oh. Oh, I don't like this part when I cry. It's a movement that starts from our heart and reaches the eyes and the ears and the hands. Tenderness means, okay, this is really going to get me going. It means to use our eyes to see the other, our ears to hear the other. Oh. You would think I would be beyond this, but I'm not. To listen to the children, the poor, those who are afraid of the future. To listen to the silent cry of our common home, of our sick and polluted earth. Tenderness means to use our hands and our heart to comfort each other and to take care of those in need. So this is the phrase in Italian that I want you to memorize. Because I think if we can say this in Italian every day to ourselves, it can become like a mantra. The revolution of tenderness. La rivoluzione della tenerezza. Anyway, we'll call our Italian friends and we'll get the exact pronunciation. So this revolution of tenderness. Tenderness is the language of young children, of those who need each other. A child's love for mom and dad grows through their touch, their gaze, their voice, their tenderness. Oh my goodness. It's going to get better, don't worry. His Holiness. They're kind of the same, aren't they? Pope Francis says, I like it when I hear parents talk to their babies, adapting to the little child, sharing the same level of communication. This is tenderness, being on the same level as the other. So he says, tenderness is the path of choice for the strongest, most courageous men and women. Don't forget that. I don't think I'm so strong. Tenderness is not weakness. It's fortitude. It's the path of solidarity, the path of humility. And then we're going to send this phrase to someone through our senators and legislatures. Pope Francis says this: please allow me to say it loud and clear. The more powerful you are, the more your actions will have an impact on people. The more responsible you are to act humbly. If you don't, your power will ruin you and you will ruin the other. There's a saying in Argentina, power is like drinking gin on an empty stomach. You feel dizzy, you get drunk, you lose your balance, you'll end up hurting yourself and those around you. If you don't connect your power with humility and tenderness, ruin. Through humility and concrete love, on the other hand, power, the highest, the strongest one, becomes a service, a force for good. Thank you, Pope Francis. I apologize for getting in the way of his message. So, what you hear today, you may think, okay, fantastic, beautiful. How do I do this? Well, one way is to take these words that we've so far heard from His Holiness and Pope Francis, take one sentence at a time, take it to the cushion, and ask yourself, what does this mean to me? How can I enact this in my life? We're going to get answers. The next book you need to get, if you don't already have it, is this book written by Venerable Thupten Chodron and Dr. Russell Coates, An Open-Hearted Life. And this is a magnificent book. It's been written for the world, not for Buddhists. Buddhists are included. But it really addresses this quest we have in cultivating compassion. Each of these authors tell us how to do it. One's a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and the other fellow is a psychologist and a teacher at Eastern Washington University. The book is so accessible. It's written into short chapters. Each author does a chapter at a time. And then at the end of each chapter, there's a meditation, a reflection that's short. So, we always say, I'm so busy, I don't have time. Look, there's 3 books that are going to tell us to read after the weekend. There's more video links, and there's all this thing I have to memorize in Italian. How am I supposed to do this? Well, if you have 10 minutes, I'm sorry, but you cannot give any of us here an argument of why you can't get to the cushion for 10 minutes. You can try. Call me on the phone. Call any of us on the phone. Tell us why you can't get there for 10 minutes. The challenge is on. 10 minutes. You can do one of these. Your mind is going to change. Because meditation is about becoming familiar with something. As Venerable Chuni reminded us last night, what are we familiar with? Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm familiar with anger. It's just a long habit. Do I like it? Of course not. Do any of us? No. That's why we're here. In the 3rd chapter, Venerable Chodron starts talking about what compassion is. And she starts this chapter with a beautiful quote from Martin Luther King. And this is a quote from a speech he gave at a commencement address that he gave to graduating students in 1965 at Oberlin College. And he says this, all these teachers are saying the same thing. We must all learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. This is the great challenge of the hour. This is 1965. This is true of individuals, it's true of nations. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. So, as Venerable Chodron pointed out, we can't live alone. We're all dependent on each other. We need to depend on each other. We do depend on each other, but we need to depend on each other as brothers and sisters. And the answer to this whole thing is compassion. Feeling compassion means feeling concerned about the suffering of others and wishing them to be free of suffering and its causes. And she says having compassion makes sense. And this is the bottom line. Whatever your topics of concern are, we all have them in the room. We're all concerned about very specific things. Some of them may overlap. But the cultivation of compassion is actually what we need. It is one of the main ingredients to meeting what we're facing every day, individually, in our work, in our family, globally. If we don't care for others, all of us will suffer, either because our needs are not being met or because we're surrounded by unhappy people. And so, as you'll hear again and again this weekend, for these reasons, His Holiness the Dalai Lama counsels, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish. What does that mean? take care of others. Compassion applies to all areas of our lives. On a personal level, compassion for ourselves, for our friends, for our family, our colleagues, our boss, the people who really bug us and disturb us. For everyone in the community level, compassion for one group, other groups, everyone. And she goes on to explain that compassion is actually the opposite and the antidote to our self-centeredness. This self-centeredness that urges us to get the best and the most for ourselves so that we think that'll make us happy. But self-centeredness, the more you think about it, and you've had experience of this already in your life, results in difficulties for those around us and ourselves. And we can't help but being self-centered right now. It's just something that we're having to sort of look at and see in ourselves and accept, but then we don't just say, okay, that's who I am. Sorry, take it or leave it. That's who I am. When we start seeing our self-centeredness, we can rejoice, number one, that we're seeing it. And then we can rejoice that we're meeting the teachings that are going to show us how to train our mind out of that way of being. We can learn how to do it. Compassion is a quality of mind that can be deliberately cultivated. And unlike other mental states that are caused by deceptions and distortions and things like our anger and greed, compassion is developed with a more rational state of mind that doesn't exaggerate things, either the positive or negative aspects of what we think a person or object is. And compassion, moreover, can influence our thoughts and emotions in a very profound way. And as Venerable Trini mentioned again last night, our teachers tell us that compassion is not like a well that will run dry. That's not going to happen. Once we've started on the road to cultivating compassion, it will grow. And it's available anytime, anywhere, to everyone. So I've got so much material here, and I'm just going to skip ahead, because some of it you heard last night, but then we have to hear these things again and again. So I'm going to skip over now to Khencher Jampa Tegchok. So this is another book that you're going to get for your library. This is the original version, Transforming the Heart. Now it's called Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage, edited by Venerable Children. And oh my goodness, this is a beautiful book. He has this to say about why we want to develop compassion. From a Buddhist perspective, compassion can be even more powerful a force than anger. It motivates us to wise action. A compassionate person is patient and undisturbed in the face of harm and suffering, and yet is powerfully engaged in the situation. Wouldn't that be great to have that kind of mind? Whatever we encounter, we're patient, we're centered, we're focused, and we're not retreating, we're not running and hiding in our room and locking the door, but we're present and we're powerfully engaged in the situation. And how do we know that's possible? Do you know anyone who has that quality right now? From my perspective, that's, I think, what we see with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many of our teachers. And we know enough about his life story that he has met all the circumstances in his life, not with anger, not with wrath. He didn't give up. He just remains focused and steady, and at the age of 82, which is how old he'll be in July 6th, he keeps on spreading this message of how we can transform our lives. Khencher Jampa Tegchok goes on to say something that we also know. When we brood and hold on to our resentment, who suffers? Mostly ourselves, but then everyone around us. Forgiving our enemies simply means letting go of our hatred and anger towards them. Forgiving our enemies simply means letting go of our anger and hatred towards them. That's forgiveness. We don't need to forget the harm. We can react to it with compassion for everyone concerned, the victims, the perpetrators, and the bystanders. And in doing this, we're able to clearly seek solutions. The other thing that's true, he says, we can't dispel our anger and resentment simply by telling ourselves not to be angry. That's not a solution. We can scold ourselves over and over again. Don't be angry about that. That doesn't work. However, if we look at the situation in a different way, the anger will dissolve by itself, in time, of course, with practice. Buddhism encourages us to realize that our enemies, the harmful behavior stems from their pain and their internal chaos. That leads them to use harmful methods in an attempt to secure their own happiness. By seeing the situation from the other's point of view, we automatically can have more understanding and compassion for the other. But, he says, this does not mean we respond passively, but that our minds are clear and we can actively choose appropriate methods to stop the harm. If we practice love and compassion well, others will have a good opinion of us. They will look upon us with kindness. They'll be friendly to us. And they'll happily help us when we're in need. We'll receive less harm for others. And even if we're harmed, we'll not be distressed. So, as we all know, and His Holiness has talked about this too, we're consumers, right? I mean, we are consumers. And we all need to get things to have enough to eat and to have clothes to wear and to have a house to live in and things. And when we go shopping, which some of us aren't doing anymore, but we also used to do it, did you go into a store and look for the worst thing? You need a new cooking pot. You look for the worst one. Is that what you do? I don't think so. Or you go and get shoes. You get the ones that don't fit and they're really ugly. And people are going to make fun of you. You know it, because they're ugly. You don't do that. You know, we buy the best thing we can afford, right? I mean, I was visiting, my mom took my sister and I to Paris, and we were on the Champs-Elysees. We went into this store, and the shoes started at $3,500 US. Well, we didn't look too long. But, you know, so we go into a store, we want the best. We get a piece of clothing. We look at it very carefully, don't we? Is it going to make me look attractive? You don't go in and buy something to make yourself look like a goofball. Others may have their opinion. When you're wearing, you look like a goofball. You don't get a haircut to look like something. So we have this consumer mentality. We have it about our life too. I think we have it about our spiritual life. Don't we? I mean, we should be looking for the best. And what is your deepest aspiration in life? Is it to have a life of suffering and low-grade experience? Is it? I don't think so. Nobody has that in mind. What we want from life, hopefully, is to have a magnificent experience in the time that we have left. And so, as a consumer, we should be looking for ways where we can have a magnificent life. And does that mean having the $3,500 shoes that you bought on the Champs-Elysees that really hurt when you walk in them? You know, so we're here because we want to have a beautiful life. And we've decided that the way to do that is not shopping, but it's looking for something that's going to make meaning in our life, in our heart. It's going to affect ourselves and others. You know, I just remember one day I went into, it's the equivalent of REI here. It's called in Canada Mountain Equipment Co-op. It's a groovy store where you can get hiking stuff. And I wanted the perfect jacket for hiking. So I got it and I paid a lot of money that I could afford. And I went out on this first trip with my friends. We're out in this mountain meadow and it's beautiful. And then the clouds come and we're all, you know, soaked But I thought, I'm in pretty good shape here. Good jacket. You other people don't have very good coats. Well, what I didn't know is it was windproof, but it wasn't waterproof. And it took another 5 hours to get back down to the parking lot. And I was, almost hypothermic by this time. I wanted the best coat. I didn't get it. But when we found something like the Buddhist teachings, and you'll have to find out for yourself, but we've got something that is a guarantee. It's not going to be like the coat that breaks the wind but doesn't keep the rain out. It's going to be something that's going to have a profound effect in this life and in future lives. But you'll have to find that out for yourself. I think I have about another 3 hours of material here. So I'm just going to, let's see. I think what I should do right now is Venerable Children clearly talks about confusion that happens with compassion. And this is very easy. I can easily go into these places of confusion, and I've heard this a few times. Some of you may have heard it more than I have, but I think it's good to know what to watch out for. And she says the first thing that we need to know is that compassion doesn't mean that we become people pleasers. So if you know that about yourself, you might be checking as you go into a situation and think to yourself, what is my motivation for entering in this situation where my motivation is to help, but, am I doing this just to protect myself in some way? Because that's what a people-pleasing attitude is. There's some kind of self-protection going on. Or we might think, if I do this, maybe my friends will notice and they'll think I'm a kind and compassionate person. So just watch out for that one, people-pleasing. The next one is compassion does not involve interfering with other people's lives and fixing their problems, becoming a Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It. So we might become so energized by the thought, I'm going to solve your problem. I can get you in shape in no time. And then I dive in, and let's say I notice one day, I think to myself, oh, Venerable Jampa's looking quite tired. I think she's exhausted. I'll just go and do her chore. And she'll be so grateful to me that I've done her chore, but I don't check with her. And then I do the chore that she wanted to do, actually, to get energized and feel good that day. And then what have I done? Well, I've kind of insulted her, kind of. She might feel like I think that she's incompetent. The rest of the story. We dive in where we haven't been invited. And usually if we're being Mr. Fix-It or Mrs. Fix-It, we're creating more problems for ourselves and the relationship we have with other people. It's probably good to check with people if you're going to help them out and see if that's the right kind of help. Compassion does not entail becoming a doormat. And this one I'm going to just read because Venerable Children makes it so clear, because this particular one really can get people upset and confused. It is not being a doormat. So she's going to give an extreme example here. And then I thought of one that's a little bit less extreme, but then you can think of some on your own too. She says this: compassion does not involve misdirected forgiveness, such as the case of domestic violence. Saying, oh, it's okay, dear. You beat me up last night and the night before. I have compassion for you and I forgive you. You can beat me up again if you wish. That's not compassion. That is foolishness, Venerable says, and it helps no one. When our children or we are in danger, she says, we should leave the situation immediately, not return until the other person has received the help that he or she needs, so that the violence has ceased and the situation is safe. Although we maintain compassion for others who are overwhelmed by disturbing emotions, we don't allow them to harm us. This is not only for our own safety, but also for their benefit, because of course they'll face many problems due to their own violent behavior. In fact, she says, compassion may entail acting in a way that the other person doesn't like at all. And that's compassionate. So a less intense example than that is, for example, we're in a situation where we're not speaking up when someone says something to us that we don't understand. That's not being compassionate for ourselves. Rather than raising the issue with the person, we just go along with his or her assessment of us or the situation, and then later we get furious. We get so angry and we get, filled with bitterness. Well, we didn't have to go down that road. We could have spoken up and just asked for clarity at the time. And then there would have been no misunderstanding, or it would have been lessened and then diffused. She goes on to say that with genuine compassion, we may have to jeopardize a relationship with someone we care about in order to benefit that person. Venerable Children gives an example in her book. I thought of one that I knew of that was just, this was a tough one for my cousin. And as parents, I'm sure you have all kinds of stories where you had to step up to the plate and say, okay, there's the line. In our family, we have values here, and you have crossed a line. So this is a true story. I won't say my cousin's name. I have many cousins, so if they watch this, only one of them will know. My cousin is married to a fireman. Well, he's now retired, but he was a fireman. And they're in Alberta, and they're raising 2 sons. And they're, in general, of course, pretty good kids. And the eldest got inspired at one point. I think he was about 15, so not of legal driving age. He got inspired to go out driving at night in the parents' family van when everyone else had gone to sleep. So he'd sneak out his bedroom window and start driving around a major city in Alberta. This went on for quite some time, apparently. And he got all his friends in the van, and they would go out for hours at night. And it got to be known in the school where he's at, this is the cool thing to do. Didn't matter if it was a weeknight, weekends, you name it. So, of course, this only could go on so long. And then at one point, about 4 a.m, on a school night, the police see this van of kids hooting around downtown. And he gets pulled over. There's no license. There's all these kids. They weren't drinking. They weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't even speeding. But, 15-year-old driving a van with a bunch of kids in it. So they take him to the police office. What do you call it? Police depot station. Thank you. And, so the parents get a phone call at 4 a.m. And the dad is a fireman. At that point, he had some kind of big position in the fire department. He was well known amongst the police department, too. So they said, hey, guess who we've got? And the parents had no idea. I mean, my cousin isn't stupid. They had no idea. And so at first, my cousin's husband thought it was a joke. Like, who's here? So he said, I think you have a wrong number. And then they said the name. Do you know so-and-so, 15 years old? And so my cousin's husband said, that's my son. And they said, yes. We've got him here at the police station. Would you like to come and get him? And then, it was, what's a famous eruption of a volcano? Yeah, Vesuvius happened in the family home. So the parents have to go down. And can you imagine the kid? How he felt? Facing his parents in front of the police chief and everyone there, and his dad's a big shot. And so he was busted big time. The police didn't charge him. They could have. But they just really scared the heck out of him in a nice way. But when he got home, my cousin and her husband said, okay, so you've taken advantage of our generosity. You've really let us down. I don't know what else was said because I think it was still Mount Vesuvius going on. But it was clearly, he had crossed a line that was just not cool. So he didn't like it, but he wasn't driving at all. When he was 16, they did not let him go for his driver's license for many months. His social life shrank down to about the size of his room. And, the parents had to do what some people don't, the phrase is, I think, tough love. Some people don't like that phrase. It wasn't tough. They just gave him some guidelines that really reared him in. They had to. And so it was effective. It worked. He didn't become angry. He didn't hold them responsible. I think he clearly saw that he could have been charged. The other parents probably could have sued the family. They would have been financially ruined. So he really got it. So parents in the room, I'm sure you get it. Compassion also gives us the confidence to say no when we're faced with someone's what we perceive to be manipulative behavior. Just say no. And then Venerable Turner says, compassion is a gift we give freely to others. Expecting something in return, even a thank you, can lead to disappointment. So we do it, and you've done it. You've done things where you don't expect anything. And we've done things where we kind of were expecting just a little bit of recognition, like, wouldn't it be nice for that person to have said thank you? But we should never do it for that reason, ever. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. With the time I've got left, we have friends that live in Sandpoint. Nancy has been coming here as a student and listening to teachings, and her husband Gary is actually an activist, environmental activist. And Gary has helped us write some letters that are posted on our website that have addressed local concerns about the environment. And we got Gary's help just because he's so darn good and he's so knowledgeable and he's really so articulate in expressing concerns about the environment. And he came here last year to talk to us and tell us his experience of going to the Paris Climate Conference in, I think it was November of 2016. 15, was it? So I was very curious, because every time I've heard Gary speak and talk to him about the environment, he's absolutely calm. He's composed, he's level, he's kind in his delivery, he's gracious. And he is very committed to the environment and the things that are happening. And so this past week I called him and I said, Gary, I really want to know how you got to the point in your life where you can be so committed to the environment and you express it so eloquently, with grace, with respect. And when we hear messages delivered like that, don't you listen? We do listen. So I was very glad that he could make time for me this past week, because actually right now he's in Washington, D.C. There's a climate march happening today, and he will be also speaking there with Idaho legislators who are Republicans. They're Republicans. And he said, I'm going to speak to them. So he thought about my question. I sent him an email, and he came up with 3 things that has helped him stay composed in the face of what he deals with all the time. I thought you'd find these interesting. I was fascinated. I would have guessed about the first one, the other 2 I didn't guess about. So the first thing that set Gary up to be eloquent and graceful and very clear is that in the first part of his career, the first 24 years of his work life, he actually worked in the Air Force, and he was responsible for communicating intelligence to generals and policymakers. So every day for that whole time he was in his career, he'd get up at 1:30 in the morning, and he'd be receiving the intelligence from many sources, and then he had to put it together in a way that he could just give the facts without getting emotionally involved to these generals and other big shots so that they could start making decisions. He did that for 24 years. So that honed his communication skills. And it couldn't be just, a huge amount of information. It had to be very concise and clear so they could then sit down and make the next decision. So that was number 1. The second thing I would not have guessed, because I didn't know, I knew that Gary had been involved. The second part of his career actually was, he was engaged with, what is it? He's working with the World Mission of the Presbyterian Church and doing things all over the planet about that. So I knew he had a spiritual interest. But what he said has gotten his attention in the last few years is he's been reading and reflecting on equanimity. Buddhist teachings on equanimity. Seeing everyone as equal, not as friend, enemy, and stranger. You know, when you get worked up about the environment, as we all have, there's an us and them thing going on. At least there is in my mind. Gary, he says he still has to work at it, but this is what he focuses on before he speaks to anybody. Equanimity. And then he also said that he has become more and more convinced that the way for his own life to be rich and magnificent is to focus on others. He wants to reduce the stress of other people. He wants to support the earth to be healthy. And he also said he feels a tremendous responsibility now. He went to university at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. He recognizes that a lot of taxpayers at that time, supported the university. Of course, he paid tuition, but tuition is only part of the story. And so he now wants to repay the kindness of the people who supported all of his learning in his life. And he also wants to have the earth to be a viable place for future generations. And he says that gives him the most impetus. Yes, he has grandchildren. Yes, he's attached to his grandchildren. Of course, he knows that. But he also sees that the planet is heading in a direction that none of us want it to go in. And he feels responsible. The third thing I wouldn't have guessed is that he's inspired to do breathing meditation every day. And there's a particular breathing meditation that he likes that's taught by Thich Nhat Hanh that involves smiling. So he says when he goes to groups like he will this weekend to talk to those Republicans, and I'm sorry if you're a Republican, please forgive me. I'm not making any comments right now. He knows that they're not so open to what he has to say. So whatever the situation is, he says he does breathing meditation, he imagines smiling. He does this for quite some time before he goes and meets with a group. He says that those three things are the keys. But the biggest thing for him is he wants to put his energy that he has towards others to reduce their stress, to reduce their suffering. I thought, wow, how beautiful. Well, here's the reality. I'm probably halfway through, but I'm going to do one more thing now. And so I'm going to do a demonstration. We're going to do a short meditation, and we'll be happy with this. Okay, so Gary's thing is equanimity, and it's true. We all have compassion in our mental continuum. We've all been compassionate. We have that in us. We've done it. We can do it. Personally, I can't sustain it. Not yet. And personally, I haven't realized equanimity, which is getting rid of these labels of friend, enemy, and stranger. I'm particularly fond of this stuffed animal. And like this stuffed animal, we have people in our lives that we're particularly fond of. And this little animal, even when it was brand new, was endearing to me. Now it's even more endearing because, there's an arm missing. The rear end is sort of exposed. One eye is not working so well anymore. It's hard to walk on these little feet. And this represents to me what we're all involved in. Birth, aging, sickness, and death. We're all experiencing this. This little stuffed toy probably won't be at the Abbey in 100 years. It's impermanent. But this little shape, to my mind, is extremely endearing. I'm not even a cat. Although some may suggest otherwise. So, like our dearest ones, we take what they do and we love them anyway. But there's the bias right there, right? There's other cat toys at the Abbey I don't really care about. Some of them I find them quite obnoxious. One of them squeaks when you walk on it. So I don't even have a equanimous mind about cat toys. Now, what does that say about the people on the planet? I'm being honest. I also have preferences for people. I'm just an ordinary being. So look what happens when we start doing this dance we do all day long. Sorry. There's my friend, right? My friend, when I see my friend in the morning, my friend tells me she likes me. But a little while later, my friend tells me that, didn't really like the tone of my voice when I said good morning. Enemy. Didn't really like the tone of my voice. Didn't say hello. But, a few minutes go by. Get distracted. This can even happen with people they sort of go in the stranger category because you're not paying attention anymore. They're sort of off your radar. Then you sort of remember, oh yeah, hi, how are you doing? My friend. But all day long, friend, enemy, friend, enemy, friend, enemy, stranger, enemy, friend, enemy. That's a whole lot of work, isn't it? Mentally, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work putting these labels on people. What happens to trust? All day long. Oh, hi. All day long we do this. Mostly we're not aware of it. In one day it probably doesn't happen with that frequency, but it could. And so, is it possible to be compassionate if this is going all day long? Friend, enemy, stranger? That's a really big obstacle. So, I truly believe that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he tells us, he greets everyone as if they're a dear friend. Not as if. He greets everyone as a dear friend. And people feel it. People can feel it when we meet them as a dear friend. And this is what we want. And this is what we're not always capable of. But it's what we want. So let's do a short meditation on equanimity. Just take note of what comes up. And this is a meditation actually that's from the book that Venerable has written with Russell Coates. So you can get back into your meditation posture. And be gentle with yourself as you do this meditation, and don't judge yourself, just take note. Think of a specific person that's in your friend category. Someone who is a dear friend, who you have a lot of feelings for. And ask yourself, why am I attached to this person? Why do I have this attachment? And listen to what your mind says. This person you've put in the friend category. Why? There's no right or wrong answer. Why am I attached to that person? What do they do? Then think of someone you really can't stand. Maybe you have wrath or rancor, resentment, or anger towards them. And again, ask yourself, why do I feel that way about that person? And without judging your responses, just listen to the reasons that your mind gives. Why? Why do I feel that way about that person? Now think of some strangers, someone you saw maybe when you're driving here or flying here, where you don't have feelings one way or the other, and you're kind of indifferent or maybe even apathetic. And again, ask yourself, why do I feel apathy towards that person? So as we ask ourselves those questions about why we feel a certain way, where does the answer end up? You can call it out if you like. Me. How they relate to me. And so I'm convinced that as we continue to do our practice, we can really do what Gary's trying to do, what His Holiness does. What we all do throughout the day is we turn the focus away from me and direct it out to others. And over time, with skill and practice and awareness, we can really grow our compassion mental muscle. There's no doubt. So with that, I think I'll just leave a few minutes left, like 3, if there's any questions or comments. And I'll just say that all the monastics can help with this, not just me.
So, oftentimes, I hear teachings given about, and I would think it's not just Buddhist teachers, but it's primarily Western teachers about we need, in order to have compassion for others, we need to have self-compassion. Um, that being said, like I also, my understanding about the classic texts, and I also want to put the disclaimer out there that I am by no means an expert on the classic texts. In fact, I can't even say I'm terribly familiar with them. But my understanding from the classic Buddhist texts is that there's really no mention of self-compassion. That the compassion is focused to all beings, and um, that kind of outward focus of compassion. If someone genuine is practicing genuine compassion, then the kind of self-compassion takes care of itself, I guess. So that's what I'm kind of wondering, because I'm a little bit concerned that like too much emphasis on self-compassion can turn into an unhealthy preoccupation with self.
So I'm going to give this a shot, and then if my peers have other ideas, please jump in. I actually didn't get to the part of the talk that I wanted to. Compassion has to start with ourselves. We have to see that we're suffering. We absolutely have to. I know all kinds of people, they don't even have awareness they're suffering. They don't. I mean, yes, they'll say, I've been sick, I've had a big illness, I had a divorce, but it's over because, I've got enough money. I can just, take care of things. Everything's okay. There's no idea about even the first level of suffering, which is the ouch kind, the unsatisfactoriness. Then for sure, there's no understanding of the fact that there's the suffering of change, where we mistake our happiness, which is just temporary, and the happiness we're experiencing usually is just that another kind of suffering has gone down. That's the suffering of change. The classic example is we sit down to a 10-course meal. It looks gorgeous. The first 30 minutes, probably really great. And if we kept eating for many more hours, it would turn into suffering. And then the third kind of suffering is the all-pervasive conditioned suffering. Just being under the influence of the karma we've created in this life and previous lives, and our afflicted mental states. And this one is the most significant. Venerable really encourages us to pay attention to that one, which we're usually not aware of. So we have to see for ourselves that we are suffering. Number one. And only when we have that recognition can we then really empathize with others that they are just like me. They're in the same boat. Earlier this week, I had a situation. It was low-grade suffering, but it was kind of an obstacle, and I was having lower back pain, which I'm not so familiar with. So just going through that experience of being limited in movement and things hurting, I could really remember seeing elderly relatives, young people who had ski accidents, you name it, people who are really in a tough situation with their body. So we have compassion for people who are suffering like that. The ouch kind is the one we tend to pay attention to. The other two, not so much. But it is true that we have to really be aware of our own suffering, because otherwise we're not going to be motivated to do anything about it. Now, I don't know if I've answered your question, Dan, so would someone else like to kick in?
I do think it's possible, this is just my theory, that this term self-compassion probably comes from Western psychology. It doesn't come from the texts in those words. But I think it's just about the words, because this very idea that Venerable Samten is talking about is true. If we don't recognize the levels of the unsatisfactory situation and also come to accept that and want to overcome it, our aspiration to be liberated from that cycle of existence is what is often labeled self-compassion. Venerable has used that many times. This is compassion for ourselves. If we want ourselves to be free from the suffering of cyclic existence in all levels, that's compassion for ourselves. when we recognize that we have this and we wish it for others. That's compassion for others. So I think, I think the term can be abused. Venerable also gives the example, I want to be so compassionate for myself, I'm going to go spend the weekend in the spa and, have chocolate 3 times a day because I'm depressed. Well, that's not actually compassion. It's indulgence, and it's doing the same thing that causes our problems. It's running towards a sense pleasure to try to soothe the pain. But I think how we use that term is really the issue, and not whether it exists as a Buddhist idea, because it does. And the other thing that I think is also interesting to recall is that the story that's often told, that when His Holiness first heard about low self-esteem from very successful Western people, he was shocked. What is low self-esteem? What does that mean? That at least from the Tibetan culture, they didn't get it. Of course you cherish yourself. But we have a different take on it here. We have a different cultural indoctrination about our fundamental badness and wrongness. So we have to kind of change our view and elevate our understanding of our potential. So we maybe need some remedial self-compassion. Maybe that's what we could call it.
Thank you.
Just what you were talking about, I couldn't remember who we were talking about this topic yesterday. But what struck me was when someone brought up learning about human limitations and self-degradation. And I'm curious about that. But human limitations is what struck me. And that's potentially a Western culture kind of thing, is we're brought up to believe that we can do anything. And when we can't do anything, we can't save the world, and we can't make it better, no matter how much we care, that's something that I think that might be connected, and that's what I'd like to learn more about, the finding that we do have human limitations and accepting that. Does that make sense, that question?
Well, I'll just say a little bit then, since it will be addressed this afternoon. And it'll be addressed tomorrow too, because we can go so easily to personal distress. We see situations in the world where people are suffering so incredibly, and we want to do something, and it wouldn't be appropriate to fly to Sierra Leone and help the Ebola crisis unless we were medical practitioners, highly skilled. And yet we see the heartbreak and the havoc that whole situation created. But still, and there's a practice called taking and giving that we're going to really focus on tomorrow that really helps our mind with that. And also, I think just knowing that we can make a difference in someone else's day with the people that are right around us, the immediate people. And I think what can really get confusing with this practice is what we think that compassion is for the people that are kind of like way out there. But I'll still be cranky with my partner, and I'll still be cranky to the people I live with, and I'll be cranky at the grocery store, because somebody ran over my foot with their shopping cart. But really the opportunity for all of us is to cultivate our own wisdom and compassion so that whoever shows up, we can be more and more accessible. And there's a more and more, this momentum of building the warmth in our heart. We have no idea often the impact we have on others, positive and negative. It can be someone looking at someone else kindly, and that look is never forgotten. I remember when I was a kid and I had to have my tonsils out. I think I was 8. In those days, surgery wasn't so sophisticated. And I remember being rolled down the hallway and then looking up at this huge light. And then there was this nurse that came in. I will never forget the look on her face. And then I thought, okay, it's good. They're going to cut something out of my body. But if that nurse is here, I'm okay. So, I'll give you another personal example. My sister's youngest daughter just had a baby. Well, as you might imagine, this wasn't the most planned event, if you get my drift. And my sister was quite upset prior to the birth of this child because, yes, the father's around, but who is this guy? And one of my friends took my sister aside, and she just told Cheryl that she is going to have this new opportunity to welcome a new little being. And she went on expressing her own joy about being a grandmother. I can't tell you, just looking at my sister's face, I saw relief flood her whole being. And, not much was said, but it came from a very sincere place in my friend telling this to my sister. And it has allowed my sister to move ahead with this. Not that my sister would have abandoned anybody. But so it's the smallest things we can do that have a huge impact. And then we have to be realistic about our, what we can do. What can I do? I can't go in a boat and pull those people out of the Mediterranean. I can't swim, and I have things to do here. You have things to do at your home. We have people that we can take care of in our, local environment. And we make these very big aspirations. That's why we have to have this aspiration to become fully awakened, to become a Buddha. We can't let that one go. And then we can do anything. In the meantime, we do what we can. And that is huge. Okay, this is the last thing.
I wanted to also respond because I heard something in what you were saying that reminded me of something that helped me a lot. Maybe it will help you. I think when I was younger, I was quite idealistic. And so you can have these great ideas of how to help the world. And then you realize your limitations and you can fall to being pessimistic, right? And the thing that has been helpful to me to learn from Venerable Chodron, I think through his holiness, is that actually the way to be is optimistic, not idealistic. And that's been really helpful for me because it's what you were saying about being realistic. A person can be realistic and optimistic, but a person who's idealistic is actually not being realistic. And then you set yourself up for pessimism. And so that's been a really helpful distinction for me to make in my own, looking at my own mind and where I'm coming from.